6:30, whatever time it is where you're at. It's a 30 right now, so we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, and Amy, I see you're already recording. Welcome, everybody. As Francis just mentioned, we are doing our survey tonight, where you could possibly win a gift card to Barnes and Noble. So, Francis, if you could just put that in there one last time.
Sure.
And then we'll.
Whoops. I actually sent it to Amy privately. Sorry about that.
I've done that before too.
Just to Amy. Sorry.
Amy's the only one that can win.
There
Gonna put that in there right now. Perfect. So that'll have some little questions on there. So answer that, and then we'll announce the winner at the end of the night tonight. I also want to let you know before we get started here, this is going to be our hashtag we're going to be using tonight. We are going to be live tweeting this using the hashtag overcoming imposter syndrome. Now, I just want to go ahead and jump right into this because I'm so excited for tonight. We have Cindy Bassett that's going to be talking about imposter syndrome with us tonight. And it's very timely because I feel like this was just discussed a little bit on the Big Bang Theory the other week, something about it just got brought up in there. You have imposter syndrome. So I think it's really timely that we're discussing this week. So Cindy, if you want to take it away, thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? I'm gonna try. I can't really pay attention to the chat and everything else. So if I need to see something from the chat, then just alert me. I'm hoping that this is going to be a pretty informal kind of conversation, and I'd really like it if it were really like a conversation as opposed to me like yakking at y'all. Because I think that there's a lot of good opportunity here for us to have conversations, and this topic in particular to me is really very much in line, not so much with what our abilities are as people, but in how we perceive ourselves and how we're feeling about our work. So I titled this talk, Imposter Syndrome, the Plague or Good Fortune of the Smart Professional. And the biggest takeaway that I think that I want any and all of you to have is that if you are feeling any of these things that I'm going to describe in this talk, you're not alone. Most people feel this or experience this, particularly at times when they are in periods of growth and trying to achieve new things and become the bigger versions of themselves that they're trying to become, which when you're in school is just like the very definition of that. So if you're feeling this, then you're not alone. So that's kind of the big takeaway. I'm going to talk just a little bit about myself, and it's not so much just to hear myself talk, but I think it might serve as sort of an example of how ubiquitous this type of experience is. I am the Electronic Services Librarian at the University of Missouri School of Law. I mentioned that I graduated library school in 1999. Or sorry, I started in 99, I graduated in 2001. From there, I went to the public library system in St. Louis County and stayed there for a couple of years and then went to the Secretary of State's office in Missouri. They have a state library that serves state employees, and I helped do collection development for that library, for the state library, and really kind of created a training program to teach state employees how to use databases, because many of them did not know or didn't even know that they had access to information resources that the library provided for them. So that's what I did there until the job that I'm in now came open. Now, I had taken a class in library school, actually taught by my current director. It was on law library administration. There were probably, 4 of us in that class. It was a very small class. And I had thought before going to library school that I wanted to do either law school or library school, and maybe both. And I decided to go to library school first because I knew that the research skills that I would gain as a librarian would serve me in good stead if I decided to go to law school. And I went through the library science program, and I really didn't, I mean, besides taking the law library administration class, I just was so in love with libraries that I didn't want to do anything else. I just loved it. And I didn't feel like I needed to do anything else. I just went and lived my happy life being a librarian. And it seemed a little fortuitous, actually, or a little different, that I came back around and I interviewed and came to work at the law library, where I had taken that law library administration class. I do not have a JD, and about half of law librarians have JDs, and half don't. Most law librarians who do any work teaching students, or it's really in academia, that it's not absolutely required, but it's pretty, most law librarians that are teaching students actually do have a JD. And ironically enough, most law librarians in firms don't. So I find that very interesting. I would think it would be just the opposite, but it's not. So most of my colleagues have a law degree. I and one other colleague don't. We're both highly talented in our own ways, but it feels like when you're surrounded by people who are trying to get a certain kind of degree and you don't have that and you're teaching them, that's sort of a breeding ground in my mind, or in my experience, for imposter syndrome. So at the moment, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the talk, I'm a JD student. I started, this is going to sound crazy, I started almost 3 years ago. It's actually probably been more like 4 when I started studying. When I made the decision that I wanted to get a law degree, and I started studying for the LSAT about this time 4 years ago, and I've just been working at it ever since. So I'll be halfway done with that program in July. I'm going to do a summer class this summer, where I'm going to be working in a legal clinic and helping veterans. I just had this book sitting here. I was like, oh, look, this is my printed out case book for my workers' compensation class. Those are all cases that I've read. I was like, man, if my teacher had handed that to me before the semester started, I would have been like, no way can I do that. But I just bit it off chunk by chunk, and here we are. So chunk by chunk, I've been doing this law degree for 3 years. I'm halfway through, and I've got a couple more years to go. So you're here actually to learn more about imposter syndrome. I discovered imposter syndrome probably, 4 or 5 years ago. And it came up in, I think, some academic work that I was reading, and I was kind of shaken, because when I read the descriptions about what imposter syndrome was, I realized that the people that were writing about it were describing things that I was having trouble even acknowledging to myself. So that was kind of eye-opening, like, oh, this is a thing. And it's actually kind of even more of a thing in academia, in schools, than probably anywhere else, because that's where people are really, kind of pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. So imposter syndrome, I thought that you might appreciate this short cartoon. And I think that this just sums up perfectly how most of us feel on the inside. Be like, oh, high profile authority positions, and of course, oh, except for actual phonies like you. And there's the guy on the couch, and he's like, oh no, they've discovered it. So imposter syndrome was actually originally called imposter phenomenon. It is a term coined by 2 psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, and this was in the late 70s. They said that imposter syndrome was a feeling of phoniness in people who believe they're not intelligent, capable, or creative, despite evidence of high achievement, which I think is probably the crux of it. And they said that while these people are highly motivated to achieve, they also live in fear of being found out or exposed as frauds. And the work that Clance and Imes did is continuing to be explored, and psychologists are still working with these ideas today. So they've stood up the test of time. I found a 2017 article from the Frontiers of Psychology that defined imposter syndrome. They said it refers to high achievers who underestimate their abilities and thus fear being unmasked as imposters. So I do want to clarify that imposter syndrome is not something that shows up in like the DSM. It's not a like psychiatric disorder. It's simply a description for something that many people have felt and experienced. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a clinician. I'm just somebody who basically heard about this. It rang a bell, and I actually put off doing anything with it for a very long time. The only thing that really kind of prompted me to put together a program on this was that I was I have a law librarians conference that I go to almost every year. And at that conference, in 2 different conversations, I was meeting with a mentor of mine who's actually getting like a Lifetime Achievement Award this year. He's pretty fantastic. And then a mentee of mine that had been assigned to me and that I'd grown pretty close to. And in those 2 different conversations with those 2 different people in very different stages of their professional lives, they both commented on experiencing imposter syndrome. And so to have these kind of synchronistic conversations, and maybe I'm the common denominator there. Maybe I was feeling it and they were just like, yeah, I felt that too. But it doesn't matter, because we all at least admitted that we had felt it and experienced it at different points in time. So it let me know that I'm not alone, and that there are a number of people who, feel this, and that there are some things that we can do to help one another get through it. This is called the imposter cycle. This was done by one of the psychologists who did the original study, or coined the phrase. And I think it's really pretty interesting to kind of work through this chart. And really, it starts here up at the upper left-hand corner with the achievement-related tasks. And from there, you move over, after you're assigned the achievement-related task, that's when the emotional experience happens of experiencing anxiety, self-doubt, and worry. And from there, they said that most people who experience imposter syndrome react to those feelings, that internal experience, in one of 2 ways. One is that they either over-prepare super zealously, like so much work to make sure that they're not found out as being not up to the task. Or on the other end of the spectrum, they procrastinate because they're scared of the feelings. And so then they try to deny that it's happening, and they wait until the very last minute. Both of those people, whichever way that the person responds to the feelings, they almost always come through and have a positive experience. So they accomplish whatever the achievement-related task is. And you can see that right after the over-preparation and procrastination, is the accomplishment comes either through effort or, whatever innate talent. Actually, it's not even about innate talent. It's just they have the skills that they need to do it, and they accomplish it. So then they get a feeling of relief, and they get positive feedback from other people. So then they get this kind of feedback loop, but there's a tendency there to kind of undercut that positive feedback, to say, oh, this doesn't really count because I either so over-prepared, it was just like I just worked my butt off the whole time. It's not that I really have these skills, I just worked really hard. Or it's that they know that they procrastinated and they just got lucky. Like, I skated by on the skin of my teeth this time, but next time they're going to find out. And so that leads us to the perceived fraudulence and increased self-doubt, depression, and anxiety. And so this cycle can continue every time you either have an achievement-related task or an achievement-related task that kind of pushes you outside your comfort zone. So I don't know if you can see yourself there. I certainly could see myself in that particular experience. And the odd thing is that I see myself on both sides. Like I can see myself doing either the over-preparedness or the procrastination or both. I don't know, it's crazy. This is kind of a dangerous thing to bring up to a group that's talking about imposter syndrome, but there is this other type of cognitive bias that I think is related, and it's called the Dunning and Kruger effect. Dunning and Kruger being two different scientists who were studying this particular cognitive bias. And the Dunning-Kruger effect is basically when people fail to recognize their own incompetence. So they feel more confidence than they are actually competent. And the reason I say this is dangerous to bring up when you're talking to people who are talking about imposter syndrome is that most of us are like, oh no, it's me, I've got Dunning-Kruger, I just really think I'm not confident, you know. But I think if you think that you have Dunning-Kruger, then maybe you don't have Dunning-Kruger. I don't know. It's kind of a crazy loop that I don't even know if I want to go down there. But this is, I think probably the takeaway is that most people are somewhere on a spectrum of between all of this, and that we can all fall prey to cognitive biases at different points in time. Are there any questions before I keep going? Because I don't want to keep yakking.
When you talk about the effect, the imposter syndrome, what typical professions are the most susceptible?
You know, sorry, I'm hearing feedback here. I don't want to. Okay. That's a really interesting question. And from what I've read, I don't know that there's any particular profession. A lot of what I've read has to do with academia, but I also read quite a lot about business and CEOs who experience this. I did some reading as well to see if there was a link between gender and imposter syndrome, because I wondered if this was something that was, and I'll talk about this a little bit further on, but I wondered if there was a link between gender. And really the conclusion that I've come to, and I don't have like a source that I can just say, you know, these guys agreed with me, but it seemed like this particular experience is one that is pretty universal. So I don't know that, I just don't think that there's any one particular profession that really is just riddled with it or got nailed by it. I wish I had a better answer for you, because I'd really like to say, you know, it's the doctors, you know, those crazy doctors, but I don't think that it is any one profession. I think it shows up when people are in situations where they're being challenged, and that could be really any type of profession. My husband actually doesn't do anything academic. He's older than I am, and he fixes things for a living, and he says that sometimes he'll show up to fix something, and he's been fixing things for a long time, and he shows up and he's like, I know I'm not going to be able to do it this time, and they're going to figure out that I don't know anything about fixing stuff, and then he shows up and he fixes it. It's like, it just, I don't think that there's a lock on any one profession.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so just thinking about, not that we want to diagnose ourselves, but sometimes it helps to have something that you can relate to. So, do you chalk up your success to luck, timing or computer error. So you can just see if you can see yourself in any of these. Do you believe, well, if I could do it, anybody could do it. Like you could figure that, if you could figure it out, anybody could figure that out. Do you agonize over small flaws in your work? Are you crushed by constructive criticism, seeing it as evidence of your ineptness? When you do succeed, do you secretly feel like you have fooled them again? And do you worry that it's a matter of time before you're found out? This was just kind of a quick quiz that I found in reading a book by Valerie Young. It was called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. And it's interesting because I had recently an experience this past year in my law degree where I competed against other law students to join a team, and I was selected to join this team. And then I was competing as part of the team. And one of the things that I did was I ended up having to, not having to, but I put together a brief, which for lawyers is never brief. And my dean was part of the group that was like helping us prepare. And she pointed out a flaw that I had made in this particular brief. And it was agonizing. So to me, it was a pretty small flaw. But it's one of those things that's like, I've just struggled with it ever since, because it's even, do you agonize over small flaws in your work? Like, yes, sometimes I do agonize over it. Was I crushed by her constructive criticism, seeing it as evidence of my ineptness? Yes, I definitely experienced that. So even, I don't relate this anecdote because I want you to be like, oh, great, why should we why should we listen to anything that Cindy has to say about this? Because obviously I'm still dealing with this. But I think that probably the takeaway for me is that this is not something that's ever going to be like completely gone. It's something that I am learning and putting tools into place to help me when I do have this experience. So. Valerie Young also identified what she called the 5 different types of imposter syndrome, and I included these in my presentation just to be able to give you another window to see yourself. So you might see yourself or you might not. It's completely up to you. The other viewpoint that you can use for looking at these, even if you don't see yourself in these particular descriptions, it's possible or even likely that you will at some point manage someone who deals with this type of experience. So you might just keep your eyes open with that kind of perspective in mind, like how can I help someone else, a friend, a colleague, someone that you supervise, how can I help them with this experience? So the first one was the perfectionist. Perfectionists set excessively high goals for themselves. The emphasis there being excessively, like it's fine to set a high goal for yourself, but if you set a goal for the moon and then you don't reach it, then you worry like, oh, did I not measure up? When really it wasn't so much that you didn't measure up, it's that you've created this huge expectation for yourself and then not been able to meet a huge expectation. So some questions you might ask yourself to see if this is fits for you are, have you ever been accused of being a micromanager? Do you have difficulty delegating? Or when you do delegate, do you feel frustrated and disappointed with the results of the delegation? Do you miss when you miss the insanely high mark on something, do you accuse yourself of not being cut out for your job and you ruminate on it for days? This is a perfect description of my experience with the brief that I wrote. It's like Have I ruminated about this for days? Yes. So, yeah. Do you feel like your work must be 100% perfect 100% of the time? Okay. The next one is the super person, Superman, Superwoman. The supers may feel as if they're frauds among colleagues who are true blue. They can push themselves to measure up, causing harm to their own health. So some questions you might ask yourself about this are, do you stay later at the office than the rest of your team, even past the point when you've completed the work that you need to do for that day? Do you get stressed when you're not working and find downtime completely wasteful? Have you let your hobbies and passions fall by the wayside, sacrificed to work? Or in your case, to school, or to school and work, because I suspect that many of you also work as you're going to school. Do you feel like you haven't truly earned your title despite numerous degrees and achievements, so you feel pressed to work harder and longer than those around you to prove your worth? Now, depending on where you are in your professional life, this may not apply to you yet, or you might be able to see experiences that you would have as a younger person or a student that might apply to that. All right, the natural genius. Like perfectionists, the genius also sets an impossibly high bar, but they expect themselves to have a natural ability for the task and to succeed at it immediately. So if you have a track record of getting like straight A's or gold stars in everything that you do, or were you frequently told that you were the smart kid, then this might have set you up to be, or to feel like you should be a natural genius. Like you should just have a natural affinity for something without having to really work to master the skills to do it. Do you dislike the idea of having a mentor because you feel like you can handle things on your own? When you're faced with a setback, does your confidence tumble? Because not performing well provokes a feeling of shame. I think that's actually kind of ubiquitous with all of these different descriptions. Do you avoid challenges because it's so uncomfortable to try something you're not great at? And I think that that's really kind of a good description of how imposter syndrome can harm us, is that sometimes we just don't try new and challenging things because we're afraid of being found out, of not being perfect. All right, number 4, the rugged individualist. Pardon me for a moment here. It's pollen season in Missouri. I think it's pollen season everywhere. Okay, so rugged individualists, they feel as though asking for help will reveal their phoniness. They're determined to keep their cover intact. And some questions to think about if you think that this might be you is, do you feel like you need to accomplish things on your own? If you hear yourself saying things like, I don't need anybody's help, I can do it. Or if you frame requests in terms of the requirement of the project rather than yourself. Like, I think just really the crux of this is that, do you feel like you're supposed to be able to manage all of life's challenges on your own? All right, the expert. Experts may feel like they somehow tricked their employer into hiring them. Thus, they feel deeply scared about being exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable. So some questions to ask yourself if this might be you would be, do you shy away from applying to a job unless you can meet every single educational requirement? Do you constantly seek out trainings or certifications because you think you need to improve your skills in order to succeed? To me, this is a really difficult question because I think as librarians, I think that we are, as a group, pretty good about acknowledging our need for professional development. We were talking before this got started about the changes in technology over the last 20, 25, 30 years. If we don't do professional development, then those skills get rusty. And so I don't know, I think as a group, we're pretty invested in professional development. So I'm not really sure what to think about that question in light of our particular profession. I guess it could be that if you were seeking something out over and over again that you'd already mastered, but you just didn't necessarily feel the confidence that you really got the message the first time or the second time. Yeah. And the last question for that one is, even if you've been in your role for some time, can you relate to feeling like you still don't know enough? I want to say no, but also in librarianship, and maybe this is just life in general, I feel like there's always something more to learn. Like there's always something about my job that I feel like I'm still learning. So. Okay, so who struggles with imposter syndrome? Does anybody have any questions about any of that before I go on? I think some of those tend to bleed into one another, but we'll have an opportunity here in a minute to talk about, to talk into breakout rooms. So that might be actually a topic of conversation, is just kind of exploring which of those you think that you might identify with, if you identify with any of them.
No, everything's okay.
Okay. All right. I'll keep.
Cindy,
go ahead. Yeah.
this is Amy. I'm in a kind of a feeling that I'm graduating in May. I've done really well in school, but am I going to be able to apply what I learn? And that fear is really scary. And as I'm job hunting, so I am shying away from jobs where I don't think I can do the work. And so that puts me in the expert category, I think.
Mm-hmm. So are you trying to discern which jobs to apply to? Like, how far out of your comfort zone do you really feel like you can get without getting so far out that you have misrepresented yourself to your employer? Is that kind of the
right? Yeah, that's a concern I have.
Yeah. You know, that's a really, I appreciate you bringing this up, because nobody wants to be that guy who like overpromises and underdelivers in a job. Like, say, you know, you can bring all these great skills and then you get here and you're like, oh no, not me. I really can't. I really don't know how to do that. But I think that you should be as honest as possible with your future employers. And that includes being honest about your accomplishments and the skills that you do have. And then let them decide if you have the right skills needed for that job, because they're going to know better than you, what the job entails and what resources are at hand for whatever it is that they need you to do. So for example, the job that I have now, the electronic services job, the library was just starting a digitization program, and I had not done digitization at all. And so really they were hoping to fill that position with somebody who was either had not necessarily had the experience, but was at least willing to learn. And so for that job interview, which an academic law librarian job interview is like a day-long process, it's crazy. But for that job interview, I did a lot of research on what the process would look like, and what I would need to learn to be able to do that. And so that's what I presented to them. I didn't come to them and say, oh, I know how to do this, and I'm your person, and I know all these metadata standards, and like, yeah, no. But what I did do is say, all right, well, this is the background that I've researched. This is one approach for doing a project, approaching this project. These are the things that I would need to learn, and this is what I would try to accomplish. And I think that that was a way for them to know that I understood the process without over-representing my skills. Does that make sense? I don't know if that helps.
Yes, thank you. And that's very helpful too. I hadn't considered it along those lines.
Part of this presentation is going to focus at the end on some different tools that you can use And one of those I think might be particularly useful for you, which is mentorship. And talking to someone about what it is that you're doing can sometimes help give a different perspective. And so that might be something to consider, is if you have somebody that you could talk to as a mentor, like, hey, I'm thinking about applying for this job. These are the skills that they say that they want. And this is what I think that I can do. Does this seem like a mismatch to you? Just to kind of check in. And that way you're not trying to just figure it all out in your head. Because sometimes we can just go in a squirrel cage in our heads and never really get anywhere productive. And then you could end up talking yourself out of even applying for something that you might be perfectly capable of accomplishing if you gave yourself the chance, or if they gave you the chance. And you don't want to do that. And in fact, there's pretty solid research out there that shows that on a gender gap, for the most part, I was looking at imposter syndrome in terms of like who experiences it, but there's also some pretty solid research that shows that males typically don't have a problem, saying, hey, I think I can do this, and applying for things that are outside of their skill set. Whereas women feel like, this is a generalization, I hope you know this, but women a lot of times will feel like, oh, I don't have every single qualification that they ask for, so I can't apply. I'm not going to be good. So I encourage all of you to think about not necessarily that you have every single qualification, but could you gain them? Could you be honest with them and say, well, I don't have this, but I have this. Like, for example, for myself, for me to make a lateral move anywhere at any academic library, even in the positions that I'm at, most of them require a JD. I don't have it, but I have half a JD, and I have this many years of experience of teaching legal research and writing and doing electronic resource management. So even if I didn't have all those perfect qualifications, I could still put myself out there on that job market and possibly be able to get a job with what I have now. Does that make sense? That's just my viewpoint on it.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, just so that you know that you're not alone. Are there any other questions before I keep on going?
No, we're okay.
Okay, all right. So who has imposter syndrome? This is pretty much true. All those smart, successful people that you think just have their shit together, most people have experienced imposter syndrome. So I've mentioned before that I was curious to see if there was a link between gender. The interesting thing about this is that some of the newer research shows that 70% of people will experience at least one episode of imposter phenomenon in their lives. That was from a 2007 study out of the International Journal of Behavioral Science. And then when you're looking at the kind of the gender correlations there, Imes and Clance actually thought that more women suffered from imposter syndrome than men. But actually that's not true. The two psychologists who coined the phrase found that once they, if they just were talking to males, they wouldn't share those feelings, they wouldn't admit to that. But once they started doing anonymous surveying, then the rates of imposter syndrome among the genders was equivalent. So it wasn't so much that the genders experienced it at different rates, it was just the willingness to talk about it or express it was different, which I thought was interesting. And this is just the part of the presentation that I want you to know where even really great people have experienced this. So some of you may recognize Neil Gaiman. If you don't recognize Neil Gaiman, we cannot be friends, and you should just run out and run to your public library and check out everything this man's ever written. So he was talking about an incident that happened. He said he was lucky enough to get invited to what he called a gathering of great and good people, artists and scientists, writers and discoverers of things. which I hear in like Neil's voice from having listened to so many of his audiobooks. And he said that I felt at that moment that they would realize I didn't qualify to be there among these people who had really done things, like really great things. And he said on my second or third night there, I was standing at the back of the hall while the musical entertainment happened, and I started talking to a very nice, polite, elderly gentleman about several things, including our shared first name. And then he pointed to the hall of people and said words to the effect of, I just look at all these people and I think, what the heck am I doing here? They've made amazing things. I just went where I was sent. And I said, yes, but you were the first man on the moon. I think that counts for something. So, of course, he was having a conversation with Neil Armstrong at the time. And he said, and this is Neil Gaiman, he said, and I felt a bit better because if Neil Armstrong felt like an imposter, maybe everyone did. Maybe there weren't any grown-ups, only people who had worked hard and also got lucky and were slightly out of their depth. All of us doing the best job we could, which is all we can really hope for, which I just think that that is just a fantastic summary of what I would like to impart to you. So some of you may recognize Neil Gaiman's wife, Amanda Palmer. She talks about this. She's got a book called The Art of the Ask, and she was talking about her experience of what she calls the fraud police, which she sums up as, we've been watching you. We have evidence. You have no idea what you're doing. You're accused of the crime of completely winging it. You're guilty of making shit up as you go along. You do not actually deserve your job. We're taking everything away and we're telling everybody, which I think is a great description of that kind of internal dialogue that can happen to us. Maya Angelou commented that she had written 11 books, but each time she thinks, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. Don Cheadle, all I can see is everything I'm doing wrong that is a sham and a fraud. So the list of people who have commented on this is it just goes on. And I think this is just some of the creative people that I noticed, some of the business professionals, Dr. Margaret Chan, who is the director of the World Health Organization, Michelle Obama, Sheryl Sandberg, Justice Sotomayor, like, man, that's a pretty stellar list right there. So if those people discuss having had this kind of experience, then I'm in good company. So at this point, if we can, I feel like this is a good point to do our breakout rooms. I'm not 100% how this is actually going to work. But my idea behind it is that sometimes it's easier for people to talk in small groups than it is to talk in big groups. And it looks like there's 27 of us right now, so it's quite a few.
Cindy, I have set up 7 breakout rooms. So we could, if all of us move into a breakout room, we would have 4 in most of them and 3 in another. I don't know if Casey, who's doing the recording, wants to move. I don't know if Jessica wants to move, you know, some of us who are on the board. So it just depends. I guess I'd need a poll to see if I want to automatically assign everybody to a room or if I need to choose name by name. So I'd be interested in seeing hands or something of those who would like to not stay in a breakout room at this point. In the, okay, so Esther.
And maybe people just want to throw it into the chat room. Like if you hate the idea of going to a breakout room, we don't have to do it.
That's true. They're there if you want them. Okay. Oh, went away.
Amy,
Well,
I'd say go ahead
yes.
and just separate people out into the breakout rooms, and then
you can actually move yourself out of a breakout room once you've been put in.
yeah.
Okay. so it'll be faster if I just set it up so that everybody automatically will move into a
Mhm.
room and you can move yourself out immediately.
Actually,
Yeah.
I don't even think you have to go into it if you don't want to, if you choose not to. So
Well, okay. So what I was saying is I can have people move automatically, which means the system moves you, or I can do it
Okay.
manually.
Okay.
And I'd rather do it automatically with this many people. So,
Okay.
all right.
Okay,
So
so-
Casey, have you paused the recording?
Hold on.
So I'm going to head back over here for just a second. All right, can everybody see that again? Hopefully.
Yep, you're good to go, Cindy.
Awesome. Okay, so the title of the talk was "How can this be my good fortune?" And so I didn't want to kind of skate past this part of it without acknowledging that sometimes having imposter syndrome doesn't have to be debilitating. And I'm going to talk next about some tools to kind of help mitigate some of it or help you get through the experience. But the silver lining that I want to hearken back to is that I think it can be, while it's a very uncomfortable experience, I think it can be a beautiful marker that you're growing. Like, I think that people experience imposter syndrome when they've put themselves into places where they've been pushed or they've pushed themselves, hopefully not into like the panic zone, but into like a learning zone where they're growing and becoming bigger versions of themselves. So that's why I look at it as like a good fortune, is like it can be a messenger to say, oh, I am in this great place that, while it's very uncomfortable, also tells me that I'm getting bigger and better. So there's the good fortune part of it. You're making progress. So there you go. All right, so strategies for dealing. And you can apply this in your personal life. You can apply this in your community life. You can apply this in your workplace. You can apply it as your own person, or also if you're a manager. So if you're helping other people deal with these. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of dealing with imposter syndrome. In fact, I shared an article with Michio about a person. It was in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and it was a thesis, like dissertation advisor, who was dealing with imposter syndrome and worried that the PhD students that, I don't know if it was male or female, the person was dealing with, were going to be able to tell that they didn't know everything that there was to know about helping guide them through that dissertation experience. So they had a whole list of strategies that I'd never even really thought about applying, but worked really well for that particular context. So these are the ones that I thought of, and there are probably a whole lot more. So the first one is compare and despair. This is a catchphrase that a friend taught me, and basically the idea behind it is that when we compare our insides by someone else's outsides, we are always going to be in despair. So if I think that the other people around me have it all together, and lots of you really do look like you've got it all together, like you got nice outsides, all your clothes are on right way, you drive nice cars, you have nice life, especially if you're judging it by social media, because a lot of people only put the good stuff on social media. But anytime I try to compare what I feel about myself on the inside, my internal experience, with what everything else is going on out there with other people, then I'm in despair. So I use this catchphrase when I kept myself doing that comparison. I'll be like, oh yeah, compare and despair. Like when I think another librarian's got it all together and they're just smart as a whip and I'm never going to figure that out and I look stupid, then I'm comparing and despairing. And that can help bring me to an awareness. If nothing else, it's making me aware of the thoughts that are in my head so that I can choose different thoughts. I don't have to stay there. Which leads us to mindfulness. Mindfulness is interesting to read about the different experiences that people are talking about now with wellness in the workplace, which I don't know if you're talking about that so much in a school context. I hope that you are. I know that I am to my law students. I see them as colleagues and I also teach them. But mindfulness is something that you can use to really just kind of pull back from the catastrophic thinking that's going on in your head and just be in the moment. So I mentioned the librarian that I was mentoring and that I'd met with. One of the things that I told her was when she got into that place of like just being really upset and, you know, kind of getting more and more upset the more she thought about it, was to put down her work and just go outside and take a walk. And she put that into practice. I love it when you give someone a piece of advice and they actually take it and it works. But she would put that into practice, and she said it really changed her experience at work because it helped her kind of detach from whatever was going on in the moment, get a different perspective. And that was mostly about being mindful about her outside experience, that she was outside, she was looking around, she was seeing different things, she was taking a break from her work as it was right at that moment. So can give you a different perspective. This concept is called invited in, and this is a little counterintuitive, and I think it might actually be one of those things that would probably be kind of a ninja level work on emotional acceptance, honestly, is to, instead of trying to push all those feelings out. So if you feel imposter syndrome, if you feel like, oh, I'm a fraud and they're going to figure it out, if you're having that internal experience, instead of trying to deny it and repress it or push it out, instead invite it in. And the idea behind this is that which we accept will then dissipate. So if you invite it in and make friends with it, then you can start to see it in a different way, kind of maybe even in the same way that I described, where you can see it as your good fortune instead of your plague. You can then start to reconsider, like, oh, maybe I'm at a place of growth, or maybe this doesn't feel very comfortable, and that's it. You don't even have to hold on to it. You don't even have to label it. You don't even have to make it nice. You just say, come on in, this is what's happening right now, and then you're setting the stage for being able to release it. I have a note in here for myself that says basically inviting in the feelings helps to diffuse them. You can treat it as a messenger with information for you. And I started to view anxiety dreams in the same way. A lot of times when I'm having a feeling of imposter syndrome, that's accompanied by a really lovely night of, you know, like running naked or running through molasses where you can't get through, you know, all of those classic anxiety dreams. And a while back, I realized that those dreams are simply messages from me to me, and to just sit back and take notice of whatever it is I'm trying to tell myself. Sometimes I'm conscious of what it is I'm anxious about, and other times I'm not. And so when I have those dreams, I start to think, oh, well, what am I anxious about? What is going on? And so that, again, is just an invitation to let it in so that it can go. Practice self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. So much, I don't want to characterize librarians as being a helping profession. I think that's unfair. I think people are attracted to librarianship for a variety of reasons. Some people may or may not see that as part of what they're here to do. But many of us have the experience of being kinder and more compassionate to the people around us than we are to ourselves. So my suggestion here is to then turn that very compassion that we give so freely to everyone else and just give a little bit of it to ourselves. I sometimes when I'm thinking about this, I sometimes think about, what would I tell a friend? Like, how would I, if a friend came to me with this experience or this feeling, how would I respond to that person? And that gives me some clues about how maybe I should respond to myself. Choose an affirmation. This is something that I've picked up at different points in my life. I don't have an affirmation that I use right at this very moment, but I have at different times kept an affirmation on hand. There are lots of different sources for affirmations, and I think sometimes you might just have to look around to find one. But the idea behind affirmations is that you're basically releasing a non-productive thought, and because nature kind of abhors a vacuum, or our brains abhor a vacuum, if you try to remove one thought, like, I'm a fraud, then you need to replace it with something else that's more productive. So maybe an affirmation that takes you to more of a neutral place. I mean, not trying to like affirm yourself into crazy bliss, but maybe instead of I'm a fraud and I'm scared I'm going to get found out, maybe an affirmation is like, I'm all right. I'm okay. I'm a good librarian. Maybe that's even too positive, but maybe just taking something up from the scary thoughts that's running through your head with in the middle of imposter syndrome. What is your mission? If you are pursuing a degree, usually people come to this degree for a reason. I mean, you're spending a lot of time and effort and energy and money to be able to do the work that you're preparing to do. So what are you going to accomplish with that? Why are you putting yourself through all of this time and effort and expense? The reason I ask that question is sometimes remembering what your mission is reminds you of the importance of what it is you're trying to accomplish. And that can help you get through a temporary feeling of being less than. You're like, okay, I'm doing the best I can, and this is what I'm going to accomplish with this, which is going to help this, or this. And coming back to that centering point of your mission can sometimes be calming. Recast yourself. This is a tool I actually use quite often, and I wasn't exactly sure how to frame it. And I don't know that recast yourself is really the right way to describe it. I have a younger sister. I have several sisters, but I have one in particular who's pretty close in age to me. She's a couple years younger than I am, and I love her dearly. She's one of my best friends, and I just think she's hilarious. And sometimes when I'm worried about something, or having less than kind thoughts, or even trying to figure out what's the next right thing to do, then I pull myself up out of my situation, and I visualize my sister in it. And then I ask myself, like, what would I tell her? Or how would I speak to her? And because I have this really good feeling about my sister, and I love her, and I want the best for her, I sometimes am able to approach how I would talk to her about something in a very different way than I would approach myself. So that's the whole idea behind recast yourself, is that if you're in the middle of this imposter syndrome, how would you treat someone that you love dearly in that place? How would you talk to them? What would you tell them to do? How would you treat them differently than you're treating yourself? Oh, I'm getting a nice message saying my internet is unstable, so hopefully that doesn't last. Okay, add sunlight. This is just a basic idea of talking to other people, that these are ideas that live in the dark and they flourish in the dark, and anytime you add sunlight to something, a lot of times it dissipates like smoke in the wind. You're able to see it a little bit more clearly. So having a conversation and talking to someone else can help you separate the facts from the fantasy. And along the same lines, sometimes if you can talk to someone who has been a couple steps ahead of where you are, and they can talk to you about what their journey is, then you can develop a really great relationship, and you have that sunlight that's been added because you're talking to someone, but you're also talking to someone who can offer you really valuable feedback. I just can't say enough about mentorship and how important it is. Community is basically just mentorship on a bigger level. And, having a group, it looks like you have this great group for your school where you are able to connect with other people, even if you're spread wide by distance. So I think that you are already demonstrating that you're working and participating in community. And I would just advise you to keep that up and to be transparent with those people. So maybe when someone says, "How are you doing?" instead of saying "fine," which I heard somebody describe fine as being effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So there's a nice little acronym for you. Instead of saying fine, maybe you are a little bit more transparent and you say, "Oh, I'm struggling today. I'm having, this or this experience. And I'm also happy about blah, blah, blah." So it doesn't all have to be about what's not feeling right, but you could also be a little bit more honest about what is actually going on with you. I heard an interview with David Sedaris that Terry Gross did on NPR a couple months ago. And he talked about aging and what that's like. And she asked him what it was like. And he said, "I just thought, what do I know? Here I am, I'm getting older. What's it gotten me?" And it wasn't much really in terms of wisdom. He's like, "I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm not the smartest person." And this was the part that jumped out at me at the interview. He's like, "I'm not the smartest person. I'm rarely the smartest person in the room. I have other qualities, but searing intelligence isn't one of them." And it really caught me off guard. It was like, oh, maybe we don't all have to be the smartest person in the room. Like, maybe we have other qualities. And what are those other qualities? Filling in the gaps. There are a couple different ways to think about this. So I have a colleague who says he doesn't try to be everything in his organization. If there's something that's missing, he hires someone to fill those gaps. It's like he doesn't have to be perfect. He just makes sure that there's somebody there who can do what needs to be done. I personally have been working on filling in my own personal gaps with education. I felt like there was a gap there for me without having a law degree. I can't do more of what I want to do professionally without it. So I'm filling in the gaps with education. So I think there are a couple different ways to think about this. So those are some of the strategies that I've identified. Almost all of them are ones that I have used personally to good effect. I'd love to hear if y'all have other ideas about strategies that you think could be useful to your fellow students. We are at 9:39 my time. Are we okay to talk for a couple minutes?
Yeah, we're still okay to talk for a couple minutes. That's fine.
Okay. So does anybody have any comments about strategies that they might have used or would want to try?
Feel free to open up your mic to talk, or if you're more comfortable, you can always type it into the chat as well.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, I think something that has worked for me also has been, in the spirit of Brene Brown, who's written books about embracing vulnerability. I have found sometimes, like, when I've faced imposter syndrome in the workplace, for example, being honest about that with my, with a new supervisor after, the first week when she checks in to say, "How's it going?" And I'll say, well, these parts are going well. I have to admit I have a little bit of imposter syndrome. And at the at the current job that I have, I've been there for about 9 months, but I did say that to her, after the first week. And I think that she really appreciated that I was being honest, and it also gave her a chance to commend me and say that I was doing a great job. So I think a good strategy is just to not only be honest with yourself, but be honest with those around you, because like you mentioned in this presentation, everyone is feeling it, and everyone, I think, appreciates when we are open about what's happening for us internally, especially in the workplace.
I also think that being mindful and taking walks and just being outside and kind of letting yourself mentally relax is a great strategy. And even maybe like before going to bed, just kind of trying to clear your mind of the day and just totally let yourself rest is something that I find really helpful. So I was glad to see that slide come up.
One I realized that I didn't include on there was journaling. And I find journaling to be incredibly useful. Just getting the thoughts out of my head. Sometimes it's just like externalizing them onto a piece of paper seems to truly externalize them. It's like I get them out.
I think Kimberly said that she read about DBT's radical acceptance. And then Joe also said that she likes the idea of community with her peer group through a Twitter group chat and also bullet journal.
Mm-hmm.
I liked what Alyssa had to say about how she deals with, in the category of let it in. She says, I specifically let it in when I am catastrophizing and answer the worries with, so what if it does happen? And tell myself that I can deal with it and roll with the punches as they come. I think that's a wonderful way to treat yourself too.
That reminds me when I started in the position I am now, and I actually came in as a manager, which is really the first time I've been a manager. And one of the employees said, that had been told to her was that nobody's going to die. We work in a public library and nobody's going to die, so we're okay pretty much. And that does help sometimes. It's okay. Tonight Rapunzel didn't show up for story time, and I took over and nobody died, and it was okay.
Casey says meditation is a big help for me. It helps me relax and rationalize. Angie says she journals and uses mind mapping to process what's really going on. And Caroline uses the "we don't work in ER" phrase often.
Angie, what's mind mapping?
I know what mind mapping is if you want me to answer that, Michio. Yeah, like doodling but structured. It's basically just kind of like outlining, but in a very visual kind of way. So you might say big ideas and then ideas that kind of branch off those big ideas, and sometimes helps you see connections between things that you weren't otherwise seeing the connections between.
It reminds me a lot of how they taught me how to outline when I was in middle school. Like the one big idea in the middle, and you branch off with all your other little ideas.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate getting this opportunity to talk to y'all. I haven't suggested doing this session for my local library school, but I've thought about it, so I think I might reach out to them and just say, hey, let's have this conversation, because I hope it was helpful for you. I hope it was as helpful for you to hear it as it was for me to put it together. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. Does anybody have any questions that they want to throw out here at the end?
All right, doesn't look like it right now. So, Cindy, do you have on your next slide your contact info in case people want to contact you? I thought so. Okay, thank you so much. And oh, it looks like, I just want to make sure we catch that too before people start to leave. Kimberly Doughton looks like is our winner for tonight. And before we just close out here, I also want to put in here another survey. Unfortunately, you won't win a gift card by answering this one, but it does help us with future programming. So if you don't mind taking a few minutes and just answering the questions on that one as well. So, but Cindy, yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to do this for us tonight. When Michio brought you to us, you know, like I told you in our breakout, I had never heard of imposter syndrome before, and so I'm really glad you came, and because it's really something I think a lot of us deal with.
I'm happy to do it. Thanks for asking me.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this has been great, Cindy. So lots of good information, and we will have the link out as soon as possible for getting it out to getting your message out to the world, as it were.
Oh, and Joe had a question about a source for the 1985 plants imposter syndrome cycle.
I'm going to type it in the chat, because otherwise it's just going to be irritating.
Although I will say that with recording in Zoom, it doesn't show the chat at all. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. It was, I'll also say it. It was from 2011. It was the International Journal of Behavioral Science. And it was volume 6, number 1, page 75 to 97. There we go. Oh, I don't know. Sorry. Hold on. Somehow I'm giving this to one person.
I had to go privately to somebody.
Yeah. It's like she's left. Like she doesn't want that. She doesn't want that side.
All right, thank you. All right, and thank you so much also to everyone that attended our program tonight. Thank you so much, and everybody have a great night.